Welcome, dear viewers, today to our series Natural Medicine. Today I have a guest with me with whom I would like to talk about the whole subject of air in the truest sense of the word. We have a lot of findings now under the corona conditions. We notice how nature suddenly recovers, the air gets better. There are also various measured values, such as CO2, which strangely do not change despite the decrease in traffic. So these are all very exciting topics that I would like to talk about today. With the founder of the company Energy, he has dealt with the subject of air and as humans and life for many decades, and I am happy to have Guido Bierter here today. Hello, Guido.
Hello.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, you've already heard. I find it very interesting what's going on here at the moment. So, if we look at these measured values of the streets, what do you think? So we have values there that, strangely enough, have not changed, even though there are a lot less cars.
So the best parameter is ultimately still the people, how they get along with the air. There is existence through oxygen, or to be more precise, the breathing atmosphere. We already made a living when all these measurements weren't there yet. The trees, the animals, the plants, and we humans anyway. So that's why I don't like parameters so much, except for the really proven parameters that can be found in physics. 21% oxygen, 78% nitrogen, and one always speaks of 1% noble gases. These noble gases contain, among other things, 0.04% CO2 and roughly the same amount of relative humidity, so water vapour. So that's all much more crucial.
The percentage of CO2 doesn't sound like it has such a groundbreaking effect.
Of course, based on this media coverage we had in the last 2 or 3 years, I think there was so much hype. Can you say that?
Yes.
We always thought, man, they don't even know how much CO2 is normal. And nobody really knows. So 0.04%, which is basically negligibly small, and even if we had shut down all of Germany, Austria and Switzerland industrially, I believe that internationally nothing would change. So that is what's being brought to us as facts. What the politicians make of it is, of course, a completely different topic. But we at Energy have recognised that it's not that important to only pay attention to the degree of purity in the case of air. With water, it's of course different. If there's mercury and don't know what else in it, what flowed in it. But luckily, when it comes to air, you shouldn't breathe heavy metals, although it has now been proven that there is also a lot of aluminium in the air, for example. But these are all other issues. We at Energy said what matters is that there is energy in the air, and the energy, or the energy source to recharge the air or oxygen, is simply the forest. That's where photosynthesis happens. In terms of atmosphere, there are actually the ideal conditions that we can already say we don't see the forest as a place where oxygen is produced. You also have to question that. We believe the oxygen is always there, but then it will just be newly, let's say, revitalised, but without it being reproduced. But oxygen isn't everything. We had experiments made by Professor Röber, for example, who took a room with 21% oxygen in it, normal atmosphere, everything was fine. But then we left the 21% in the room, so 21% oxygen. Then the relative humidity was withdrawn, close to zero, if possible. But people couldn't take it, even though there was oxygen. So basically, a huge topic.
So you always need the connection between water and humidity and oxygen.
And so on. We don't actually breathe air or oxygen, we live in an atmosphere. Professor Jung, who headed the Scientific Advisory Board for us for 10 years, wrote specialist books for us. Great work. Received a science award from the IPO for International Prevention Organisation. Now, I lost the thread. What did Professor Jung say? Exactly, thank you. If you want to cure the fish in the aquarium, treat the water first. That means even if we humans don't live in an aquarium, of course, but we also live from the atmosphere. And if we now make ourselves healthy internally, and through nutrition with the right preparations and food, but inhale poisonous air, then that's it. Because during the day we breathe, scientists are arguing about between 8,000 and 20,000 litres per day of air volume.
I also think that life expectancy is 2 years shorter in big cities. Is that correct? That probably has to do with, well, you can now say that the forest becomes like an antidepressant. Then those who go into the forest, of course, move more. But I also notice, I come from the Stuttgart area where I ride my bike into the city, the transition from fresh air up in the forest, compared to the city, well, it's like suddenly driving through a wall, and then you also have the feeling there is no longer any air. What options do I have now when I live in the city? And when I realise, well, the air quality is really very limited. I now have an option to place this energy device somewhere. In the house or somewhere? How does it even work?
So that's the point of our technology, that you can cause this vital or healthy forest air everywhere. That should also take place in the car at some point. We already have a few hundred doctors in Germany alone, 1,000 worldwide, who simply use this as a basic therapy, as a basic energy supply. And companies also have that for prevention and workplace health promotion, and a few thousand families in Germany alone have it at home, to simply practice prevention at home.
Okay, because we have talked about Stuttgart, there is also a connection to the automotive industry, where if we take a closer look at the topic of the automotive industry, where can you put that device? What would make sense now, and for whom above all?
For whom? For the people who breathe.
Yes, okay.
From 7 to 70 or from 8 to 108. I don't know, we humans just have to understand that maybe we should care a little more about what we breathe. Many people know more about the nature of the wine or what kind of oil goes into the engine, especially in Stuttgart. You can say that. Most men probably know 15W40 and so on, but when it comes to breathing air, then all the steam is literally gone. I just want to mention a brochure at this point. It's actually a guidebook, a 40-page guidebook, which we simply defined using the breathing atmosphere. Sooner or later this should be the little ABC of breathing, because we can research anything but how to breathe properly and what to breathe and how it can be improved. There is basically nothing about that. There's a website, lebendigeluft.de, that's the name of it, for example. There's also all sorts of information there. The little atlas is available for download. There are also a few statements from doctors, because, as I said, it's not only used preventatively, but it's also used therapeutically. But we don't want energy to be a medical product, because we work with air, and air will never be medicine in any way, even if you try that with the separated oxygen. So energy revitalizes the breathing atmosphere, the immediate breathing atmosphere. Like an air conditioning keeps the immediate breathing atmosphere cool, a heater warms. However, both situations come at the expense of the relative humidity, and we urgently need it.
If I take a practical example now, I have a truck driver. He drives his car or truck for many hours a day. What difference does it make now with or without energy? How can he benefit from it?
So, again, holistically, because oxygen produces energy, from the big toe to the last tip of the hair. And about 20% of the energy we take in from the atmosphere is used up by the brain, you have to say. That said, the ability to concentrate is an issue.
Less tiredness at the wheel?
Of course, sure. Energy formation.
Faster response times?
I don't actually want to say tiredness, but the ability to concentrate. You've now got into the subject of professional drivers, where of course we have a lot of people who use it because they just sit behind the wheel all day. But we were actually sensitized to this world by having a lot of racing drivers, professional racing driver from Formula One, from the DTM, from motorcycle racing. We have a crazy, with respect, crazy stuntman who's now 63, and he holds 10 speed records, Mr. Hayabusa. That's kind of crazy, of course. But then we also have a Jensen Button, Rubens Barrichello, and they've repeatedly confirmed to us that they have the feeling they can concentrate longer and better. And they told us that subjectively. We knew that, of course, that's why we went into this area. So one vision from Airnergy that's already being implemented to a certain extent is to enrich the air conditioning and ventilation systems of cars, trucks, and so on with vital air. That's the bottom line. But a lot of preparatory work was necessary. We're now relatively close, because that, of course, also has something to do with product liability. Because if you were to press a button on a Mercedes, for example, then someone would get dizzy, then something would happen, and for some reason it was attributed to Airnergy, then we would have a problem. Of course, we don't want that. But so we still have to provide all kinds of safety criteria, and then we can start. But there are already many real racing cars where that's put in. And these people just say they can concentrate longer. It's used in the 24-hour race at Le Mans, in Spa, at the Nürburgring and so on. But I don't want to make it too motorsport heavy now. But it just became clear how much better people can concentrate.
I still remember from childhood, when I got into new cars, I always felt sick. Until today. I get a headache. And if there's a solution, I will be personally grateful. Or do you maybe know why?
Not in detail, but broadly, yes. So I believe, believe it or not, there are even fragrance designers in the automotive industry.
I know it from the supermarket too.
Yeah, and that's true. And we have to remember that there are thousands of different materials in a car, and they all have vapours. If it's the colour of the leather, if it's a plastic, everything evaporates. At Airnergy, among our customers, we have people with multiple chemical syndrome, I think it's called. These are people who can't even have a carpet at home, no wallpaper on the wall. And even they breathe Airnergy after 2 or 3 minutes, they already have enough. This helps them, and they also drink the water that's produced or activated by Airnergy. But there really are these crazy things, so clearly it makes sense, these stimuli that are set there in the car. And ultimately there is, of course, a little poison in it that should be disposed of.
OK, now we have these vapours from plastics and toxins, they are there. I mean, you don't get a headache for nothing. What would Airnergy do with it now? Capture it and get it out of the window, or how can I imagine that as a layman?
Well, first of all, Airnergy can't do anything. This is man. Imagine you have 2 glasses of water on the table. We basically have it here. We now take a lump of sugar in the cold water, or at room temperature, put the lump of sugar in. It doesn't disintegrate, for example, but if your glass is enriched with energy in the form of heat, like a coffee, then you throw in a lump of sugar, it's stirred 3 times, and the water molecules and sugar molecules have connected. It's a bit similar with the air. So the oxygen must be able to form connections, that it can function in the metabolism. And the prerequisites must be created so that this oxygen can be better utilised again. And Airnergy does that somehow, by basically preparing the energy externally, like central heating, which can then work in the body. In the past, you had the heaters in the living room somewhere, you had the exhaust fumes inside, and so on and so on, and Airnergy basically prepares this externally. But you expect me to be somehow explain a very complex topic somewhere in this area of the breathing air in just a few minutes. We've provided a lot of information in 20 years, but still not found the key moment. So in short, Airnergy is somehow a forest air generator. Doctors now also say this. Convey this to patients who don't want to go into depth either. What are terpenes, the messengers in the forest and so on? We don't need any of that at home. So Airnergy basically brings the energy of the healthy forest air home, into the office, into the car, wherever. And then it does everything.
If I live in a big city in Germany, do I have the opportunity to say I don't necessarily want to buy the device, but there are contact points where I can say, now I'm going to do some forest air treatment, because I don't have a forest or the weather is bad. I just need a boost of energy.
Yeah, so first of all, of course, we recommend going into the forest. That's 1,000 times, I don't want to say better in that sense. Airnergy is an alternative for those people who just can't, who sit in the office 10 hours a day and live in the poor air conditions, and ultimately inhale a few hundred litres every hour. So you can rent it, you can buy it, you can try it. As I said, we have 300, 400 locations in Germany alone. If you go to our website, energy.de, there's a so-called provider search, or you just need to enter energy provider search on Google, and you'll find a selection of addresses. There are doctors, there are naturopaths, there are fitness studios, wellness studios, lots of salt caves are there, because they have long understood that salt air complements forest air or vice versa. And then you only need to enter the zip code or the place of residence, and then you can pay for 10, 20 applications, 21 minutes each. And then I always say it's like a drink. You can have it anywhere, let's say at a kiosk. You get it for €1. Is it somewhere in a better hotel or restaurant, wherever? It costs €4 or €5. And that's the way it is with energy. The complete range is there, but it's actually recommended to do it curatively. At least 20 applications. So once, twice, 3 times makes sense, but it's not really sustainable. The best, of course, is when you have one of these forest air generators at home or in the office.
I'm just imagining an entrepreneur, for example, who has a company with a large open plan office. There was this study that smokers work more efficiently because they just take deep breaths. Now, this deep breath, what they breathe deeply, we know that is not healthy, but apparently taking this deep breath still helped. The concentration and receptivity was improved as a result, even though toxins were inhaled. I think it was from Fraunhofer Institutes, I'm not sure. But only briefly, if I want to give my employee, who is a non-smoker, the opportunity to say, I'll give you something too, you can also take a deep breath. This is how we improve the oxygen transport, the ability to concentrate. Or maybe even for the smokers who can rehabilitate themselves afterwards.
I would have said that right, afterwards.
Exactly like that, but then they would spend even more time. I was thinking more of the fair conversation for non-smokers, but, well, do you have any companies that do this for their employees?
Of course, we were very close to getting into SAP, because Dietmar Hopp is also one of our official references since, I believe, 2004. And back then we tried it as a giant company. But that was a size too big for us, I have to honestly say that. But now we have loads of small businesses. The doctors too, they don't just do it for the patients. But there are some who say, I'm happy on Monday mornings, when I can sniff at my generator, they often say. Of course, they also do that for the employees. Right now in the corona period, we've received all sorts of feedback. Because, of course, the nurse says, just like the doctor, what's important? An immune system. And we got mail from all over the world. Now comes your time, and so on. But that's a big political issue that ultimately takes place there. I know that with the, what was it? Chloroquine. Ultimately, it's chloroquine.
Hydroxychloroquine.
No, exactly. Over there in the USA or in India. They've known for 60 years that it works, but they've been trying for 2 months to gain credibility, and they haven't made it until today. That's why we're a little relaxed at Energy. We've done it in 20 years to convince many thousands of people, and some are even real fans and think, why don't we know about this? Why don't we know more about the air? So that's why we're relaxed. And we've started great new projects, specifically with Brain Plus, and we're very well positioned for the future, I believe. And there we spread awareness of a completely different source of information. Well, let's put it that way.
Yes, I also want to refer to other interviews that we will do in the future. On the subject of hydroxychloroquine, there is also a connection to Trump, and I think there was a story to it too. About your company and Trump?
Yeah, not with him personally in that sense, although we have a signature from him, I think in 2014. We received an award from the American Academy of Hospitality Sciences, the first 5-star green award they ever gave out. It's actually an institution that evaluates customer service, so hospitality services in that sense. And I didn't know that then either. We then got the certificate, and lo and behold, he was an executive ambassador or something at the time. So honorary member, and he signed it on the left. We kept that to ourselves for a few years now. But now we're slowly going there because it is true that obviously the methods that may not or should not yet be recognised here or whatever, the so-called outsider methods, they're brought massively into consciousness in the States, especially with UV light. You can achieve a lot with that. And energy is light, air and water. In the US we call it LAW, light, air, water. And obviously we seem to get quite a lot of support there. But for now, we still want to stay down to earth. We're now concentrating on Brain Plus, and we will be surprised at what is still to come. But nothing's more important in prevention than the air. I know you know a lot about food topics too. This is nothing that we have dealt with at Energy, because a doctor once said to me that he doesn't think diet has any impact on health. And then I left the subject somehow. I think energy or air has a lot of influence on health.
Yes, well, I think a lot of what is good for us and what we are convinced of has an impact on our health. And part of it is the breathing and also certainly the diet. And honestly, once you feel good, it also plays a role.
Well, you're now addressing the placebo direction a bit, but of course we have a lot of studies. An HRV, the heart rate variability measurement, that measures the sympathetic, parasympathetic nervous system, it can't really be manipulated, unless an aeroplane flies by and so on. But after a few thousand measurements, we know what is placebo and what is not. But we at Energy always say we don't care whether we have 10 or 50% placebo, as long as we can prove an effect. And of course, we have made placebo-controlled observations and studies. Today it's said that if you don't study at least 100,000 people, it's not a study. That's why we say, OK, then that's practical observations. But we have proven it all. And in the end, you have to think about what you have to lose. You have a little money to lose, because if you put such a device at home for the family, depending on what you want, we have, let's say with Mercedes, we have A, B, C class and so on, and we don't have an A class because that doesn't make any sense. But we basically have a C class and an E class and an S class. And even the S class, if you were to buy it, in the context of a financing or leasing, that's about €7 or €8 per day. And the entry-level device, the Basis Plus device or the Brain Plus device, you can get that for €3.50 a day. So we don't need to talk about money anymore.
If I want to find out more about it as a viewer, that I say, OK, I have to read myself into it first. Where can I do that?
Yes, at Energy we say the proof of the pudding is in the eating. You just have to learn. Everyone should read The Little Atmos. This is a guide, I think I already mentioned. It's 40 pages. You should just read it.
Where can I find it?
On the energy.de website, but we also have a website called lebendigeluft.de. There's the Little Atmos. There are many videos, statements from doctors and so on. You have a quick overview.
Very nice. Then I can deal with the subject of air again on a different level.
Yeah, breathing atmosphere, to be more precise, please.
Breathing atmosphere. Very nice.
Because air is much more. Air is reduced like water. Professor Pollack, with whom we also have dealt with in certain scientific situations, says water is much more than just H2O, or the other way around. OK, well, just as a book recommendation.
Well, we're still curious. We'll definitely do more interviews together. Nice that you were here. We now got a new all-round view, and good luck with your work.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Dear viewers, that was once again an insight into the health subject of the breathing atmosphere, where we need fresh air, and how we use our breathing all day, from morning to evening, all our life. That's why it's just a very important topic that we should keep an eye on. And I am pleased that I was able to give you an overview of it today. Stay vigilant, question everything critically, try things out. And I look forward to further broadcasts. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.